Welcome, everyone, to the onpoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, Doug Ford and his new cabinet were sworn in on Wednesday of this week. We'll give you the highlights of who's where.
An injunction to stop bike lane removals has failed, and we get into what happens next.
It was Mark Carney's first week as Prime Minister, so we'll make some inevitable comparisons to the first week of Doug Ford's new cabinet.
And in your column, my column, I'll look at the end of the consumer-facing carbon tax.
And I have a post-election column on why Doug Ford keeps winning and winning and winning, and part of the reason is the opposition parties would rather fight each other than the Tories.
It's Friday, March 21st, 2025, so let's get to it.
Hey, partner.
Hello,
Little
sir.
sugar off the top, as always.
Always.
I love the T-shirt today. Join the resistance.
Yes, so for people listening at home, this is a stylized insignia from the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars with a little bit of a maple leaf on it as well.
And what could that possibly refer to?
Oh, I have no idea what in current events Canadians might have some thoughts about resisting, but I'm not the only one wearing a good T-shirt.
I went into the attic again. It's amazing how many of these souvenirs I apparently kept over the years. There's two reasons I'm wearing this. 23 years ago, this week, the Progressive Conservatives had a leadership convention to replace Mike Harris, and it was Ernie Eves, Jim Flaherty, Tony Clement, Elizabeth Whitmer, and Chris Stockwell all vying for the title. Remember how I said last week that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes?
Yes.
Okay, there were a lot of rhymes from that convention to what we're seeing now. Ernie Eves went into this convention as kind of the inevitable winner, and he won on the second ballot. That was what the federal Liberal leadership was like a couple of weeks ago, if I recall. There was an inevitability about who was going to win that. 2 weeks ago, the Liberals picked a guy who didn't have the seat in the legislature. 23 years ago, the PCs picked a guy who did not have a seat in the legislature. Ernie Eves had left public life, and he had returned to private life in the private sector. He was a Bay Street rainmaker. Unlike Mark Carney, who we expect to call an election on Sunday, Ernie Eves got one of his backbenchers to resign, created a by-election. He ran in the by-election, won the by-election, and then stayed on for a year and a half as premier before calling the election, which he then lost to Dalton McGuinty. And I remember talking to Mr. Eves many years after the fact. And I said to him, what was the big mistake? And he said, I should have called a snap election right after I won the damn leadership. And, the fact is he was never more popular than he was on day one. We had SARS, we had mad cow disease, we had that blackout on the northeastern region of North America. The news just was worse and worse and worse all the time he held office. So you just never know about these things. David Peterson called an early election in 1990, lost. John Turner called a snap election in 1984, lost. Pierre Trudeau called a snap election in 1968, won a majority.
Yeah.
Ernie Eves did not call a snap election in 2002, ended up losing. Mark Carney, likely to call a snap election on Sunday night? Yeah. We shall see.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year, right? Because one could argue that Doug Ford has disproven or forced us to revise our beliefs about Ontario politics, right? Ever since David Peterson called that early election, the thinking has been voters will punish you. The Tories did not get the magnitude of win that they wanted in this election, but the voters also clearly didn't punish them very severely for it. Right. And now we will get to assess whether a snap election is in fact the right call. I also just want to add very briefly that 2002 Progressive Conservative Leadership Convention was, I'm almost certain, the very first political convention I was ever present for. I was not working it in a normal sense. I was there with my dad. But okay. I did attend, and one of my earliest memories of not quite covering politics, but there was a moving scrum as, I don't know if you recall, but before the last ballot results were actually announced, Jim Flaherty effectively conceded to Ernie Eves, and he moved across the convention floor. And this is exactly the kind of event that you miss most when you talk about how superior delegated conventions are.
You are totally right about
that. And I got physically bowled over by the moving scrum as people were trying to question Flaherty on his way to Eves. And also, because this is the kind of thing that happens in these kind of live events. A person in a wheelchair also nearly got bowled over. That was another one of those memories that's stuck in my head.
Well, 23 years later, you still remember all this, whereas with all these one-member, one-vote conventions, the next week people have forgotten everything because they're so undramatic.
Yes.
Anyway, with that, let's get off to issue one. Almost 3 weeks ago, Doug Ford won his third consecutive majority government, and on Wednesday of this week, he finally decided to unveil the first cabinet of this, our 44th Parliament. JMM, it still has 37 ministers, including the Premier. That is obviously too many for us to go through here, every single one to see who's where. But why don't you take us through some of the more relevant changes?
Right. So the biggest change here is the Education Ministry, which, full disclosure, TVO reports to the Education Ministry. So Jill Dunlop had been the Education Minister. Paul Calandra is the new Education Minister. Education, the second largest portfolio in cabinet behind healthcare. So this is a pretty substantial promotion for Calandra. As dear as municipal affairs and housing is to my heart, it's not the most prominent ministry. So that's a pretty notable change, probably the largest change of this week. Jill Dunlop, for her part, is now the Minister of Emergency Preparedness and Response. Todd McCarthy is now the Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Also, that ministry will now be in charge of conservation authorities. I believe they used to report to municipal affairs, but they have lost a lot of their planning powers under this government, so arguably fits more comfortably in with conservation and parks. Speaking of municipal affairs, Rob Flack is now the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Stephen Lecce is still the Minister of Energy, but he is now also the Minister of Energy and Mines. He is also getting responsibility for broadband expansion and connectivity. I don't quite know what is behind there. Off the top of my head, I think you're going to see some similarity between the, like when we roll broadband cables out to rural areas, we already have like a lot of Hydro One corridors, that kind of thing. I think there might be some work going on there. Mike Harris, the son of the former premier, he gets a pretty big promotion from the Ministry of Red Tape Reduction, which, despite its title, is not like the most important ministry.
Not even a real ministry, but anyway.
Yeah, exactly. He is being promoted to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Which is a real ministry.
Which is a real ministry, and particularly in Northern Ontario, a very important ministry. And the new person in the cabinet who was not in the previous one is Z. Hamid, who becomes the Associate Minister for Auto Theft and Bail Reform.
Now, because this isn't really a new government, we've got the same party in power, just renewing its mandate, a lot of people stayed where they were. And let me give a fast list here of who didn't go anywhere. Sylvia Jones, still Deputy Premier and Minister of Health. Peter Bethlen-Falvey, still Minister of Finance. Caroline Mulrooney, still President of the Treasury Board, Minister of Francophone Affairs. Michael Kersner, still Solicitor General. Natalia Kuzendova-Bashta, still Long-Term Care Minister. And let me add one more note about those four. Bethlen-Falvey, Mulrooney, Kersner, Kuzendova-Bashta, they all took the oath of office in both of Canada's official languages. Yep. They were the only ones. So good for them.
Yeah.
That's a nice thing. Vic Fedeli, still Minister of Economic Development. Doug Downey, still the Attorney General. Kinga Surma, still Minister of Infrastructure. David Piccini, still the Minister of Labor. Stan Cho, still Minister of Tourism, Culture and Gaming. And how about this? Raymond Cho, still the Minister of Seniors and Accessibility. He is 88 years old. He is obviously the oldest cabinet minister ever in Ontario history, and of course the oldest active MPP in Ontario history. 88 years old, be 89 in November, so the Premier loves Raymond Cho. He's always in cabinet.
Yes, well, and they know each other from Toronto City Council back in the day. So did you notice anything, quirky or different in this time around?
Because this is Ontario, and therefore swearing in ceremonies are often incredibly boring. So I try to find...
We try to make politics interesting, but boy, some days.
It's a lift. It's a heavy lift. So I'm looking for stuff off the path from time to time. And strangely enough, and I hope people aren't going to get mad at me if I point this out, it's just an observation. Yeah. You can kind of find out who believes in God and who doesn't in the way that they accept their new responsibilities, because you have the option as an Ontario minister of swearing an oath to God with your hand on whatever book is important to you.
Yes. Or
you can simply affirm that you are going to accept all these responsibilities that you are about to undertake. So I note, without prejudice, Michael Parsa, who's still the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services. Greg Rickford, still the Minister of Indigenous Affairs. Prabmeet Sarkaria, still the Minister of Transportation. None of them said, "So help me God," at the end, and they all just affirmed. So there, for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, and I think there's a few interesting things here. One, Greg Rickford, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, I don't know if this was what Rickford was thinking. Maybe he's an atheist. I actually have not asked him about this, but there is an idea that you could be sensitive towards Indigenous communities in this province by not bringing in the baggage of Christian history, right? Like residential schools were run by Christian denominations, and not associating your title as the Minister of Indigenous Affairs with religious doctrine or whatever. That might be a form of sensitivity to the communities that Rickford is responsible for. And of course, I mean, Prabhat Sarkaria is a Sikh.
Yeah.
So, he may simply have chosen not to use the language that is inevitably, drawn from
Judeo-Christian tradition.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
They are all, of course, swearing. Well, they are all serving in the government of the King, His Majesty Charles III, who is still
the head of the Church of England,
a defender of the faith.
That's right.
So,
that's right. Yeah.
These details.
I remember the first time I saw this happen. I think I'm right about this. The first time I saw a minister sworn in without "So help me God," I think was Floyd Loughran, 35 years ago. He was Bob Rae's Minister of Finance. This is in the NDP government of 1990. And I remember at the time, some of us in the press gallery were sort of, whispering to each other. He didn't say "So help me God." It was noticeable by its exclusion. And now, of course, as we just suggested, many ministers do it. So a sign that the times they are a-changing.
Yes, indeed. Can we talk for a moment about how the opposition parties reacted?
We talked last week about the fact that we noticed that Doug Ford put out a press release after Mark Carney won the federal Liberal leadership. And even though they're in different parties, Premier Ford the statement said something like, "Welcome to the fray and congratulations on your victory. Look forward to working with you," yada, yada, yada. And, it's kind of like the classy civil thing you do on day one. Yeah. And I note on day one for this new Ford cabinet, I thought the NDP actually caught the spirit of the moment, which was to say congratulations to the new ministers on their portfolios. And of course, we will be watching and making sure that you do your job. But there was a note of civility there on day one, which I think should be encouraged. I think we're allowed to do that, be civil on day one. Compare that with the Liberals, who I thought, just put out the kind of same boilerplate, nasty, pinched kind of comment, which was, this is a failed cabinet and, essentially, realigning the deck chairs on the Titanic and nothing new here. And, anyway, I just thought it was overly negative for a government that has just been reelected with a majority government. And, we can afford for one day to be a little bit civil in this business. That was my view.
It does intrigue me to think how the different parties are reading the mood of the moment.
Yes.
Right? I think just based on those reactions, the NDP are taking a bit of a breather, if I could put it that way, from the most combative forms of politics.
No, for one day anyway.
For one day. And the Liberals maybe are reading their base differently and suggesting that their base still wants to see, fists up, like keep fighting. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're both reading their bases correctly. Right?
Yeah.
But we will see how this goes.
But my comment on civility stands, notwithstanding.
And that's fair.
Can I do one more thing on this?
Sure.
Because this is a good opportunity, given that we just had the swearing in this past week of two cabinets, actually, federal and provincial. I always remember the funniest moment I ever saw in a cabinet swearing in. It was a guy named Ted McMeekin, who's from Hamilton. He was a minister in the McGuinty and Wynne governments. And
he's now a city councillor in Hamilton, right?
Also city councillor, that's right. By inserting a comma in a very strategic place, he gave the oath a whole new meaning. And, you've got to remember here, they say something like, "I swear to execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as minister of whatever, whatever, so help me God." And Ted McMeekin, who was about to get a promotion to a much more difficult portfolio, and everybody knew it, said, "I swear to execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, so..." And then he looked up to the heavens and he said, "Help me, God." It was just a great moment. And I always thought I remembered him doing it, and I just wanted to check. So I emailed him this week and I said, "Do I remember that correctly?" And he said, "Yes, you do." And that comma made all the difference.
Before we leave issue one, seems like we can't go a week without having to talk about this. The The President of the United States reiterated his concerns about making Canada a 51st state. The Premier had a response to that again this week, and I believe we've got a clip.
I kind of flipped this around. What a compliment. We'll never be a 51st state. Canada's not for sale. But isn't it nice that someone thinks we have the greatest country in the world and they want access? And my simple answer to that is, you want access, let's build an AMCAN fortress that I've been saying.
Well, there's a guy trying to, extend the olive branch again by putting a different spin on this 51st state business. I got to say, I know the Premier's hot on his ANCAM idea, where we can sort of exclude Mexico and create this new America-Canada trading bloc. I mean,
no sign of it.
It's going nowhere. I'm sorry, Premier.
Washington.
It's absolutely going nowhere. Yeah. Washington isn't the slightest bit interested. They want Fortress America and to hell with the rest of the world. So, I mean, keep trying, I guess, but it's not.
I'm not sure I've got any better ideas, but we'll just. I'm not optimistic.
Yeah. Anyway, stick around, everybody, because we're going to have some more comments on the fact that we had 2 cabinets sworn in this past week, Doug Ford's and, of course, Mark Carney. So hang around for that. And in the meantime, I'm off to camera 2 and issue 2 right after this. A group of cyclists has lost a legal battle to prevent the provincial government from removing bike lanes in Toronto. Now the removals could go ahead next month. JMM, bring us up to speed on this, if you would, pun intended.
I'm trying to think of a gearing pun.
You just did it.
So last November, the government passed Bill 212, the Reducing Gridlock Saving You Time Act. They love those bill titles. The bill allowed for the removal of 3 major bike lanes in Toronto on Bloor Street, Yonge Street, and University Avenue. It also requires municipalities to seek permission to install a new bike lane if it means losing a lane of car traffic. So a group called Cycle Toronto brought this legal challenge forward. They have succeeded in getting the court to hear the issue, but what they had wanted last week was an injunction to stop the government from removing these bike lanes while the court hears the full matter.
And they didn't get the injunction.
They did not. When courts consider a legal injunction, they apply a test, and the test is basically you have to prove that there is a serious issue to be tried, that you're not just wasting the court's time. Then you also have to, the court also has to determine who is going to suffer the most harm. And you might think, well, the government's own evidence suggested that cyclists would be put at the risk of physical harm here. What the court actually decided was that the legal precedent requires that the court assume that laws are being executed in good faith and for the public interest, and that on that basis, it didn't feel like it had sufficient grounds to grant the injunction.
Well, here's a little interesting postscript, in as much as I know you and I are pests when it comes to things like facts.
Yes.
So we love decisions that are actually based in fact, and I'm not sure this one was. I mean, what have we learned?
Right. So as part of the legal proceeding, the Cycle Toronto gets to require that the government bring documents forward in terms of its own internal research. And government documents revealed that the province knows that these bike lane removals will not ease congestion, that building the lanes on secondary roads, as the Premier has proposed, will be difficult and in some cases not possible, that collisions for all road users will go up by something like 54% in the government's estimation when the bike lanes are removed. This is not science commissioned by, Vegan Cyclist Communist Incorporated. This is the government's own research suggesting this, and those reports have clearly given Cycle Toronto a lot of ammunition in this fight.
Well, the Premier knows what his base thinks about bike lanes, and they don't love them. So out they cut. Mind you, what's funny? We're here 100 yards south of Yonge and Eglinton, right?
Yes.
And there are bike lanes on Eglinton.
Yes.
So we see what's going on Eglinton Avenue West, one of the major east-west thoroughfares of the capital city. We see it all the time. There are bike lanes there, and bless me if I've ever seen anybody use them ever. And yet the Eglinton bike lanes are in, and no plans, I guess, to take them out.
Well, and additionally, I do think the government would have a hard time blaming the Eglinton bike lanes for congestion after the decade of crosstown construction.
Good point. Good point. We got a little postscript on this as well. We received an email from a listener named, let me get his name right here, Ivan Mirko Senyanovich. I hope I'm saying that correctly, who wrote in about why he thinks, remember, the Tories only lost 2 former sitting members on Election Day, and Christine Hogarth in Etobicoke Lakeshore was one of them. Ivan posits that it was the bike lane issue that actually did her in, because she barely won. I think she won by less than 1,000 votes 2.5 years ago, and then on Election Day she lost big this time, several thousands of votes. So why don't you read the email?
Right. So Mirko writes, apart from the Minister of Transportation and the Premier himself, former MPP Hogarth was the most vocal member of the government threatening to rip out bike lanes, both during the whole Bill 212 boondoggle and during her campaign, going as far as making it the #1 promise in her literature. And I believe we've got a shot of the pamphlet.
There it is right there.
There we go. By doing this, she turned her candidacy into a mini referendum on the question of bike lanes in Toronto. So a movement was launched to support the Liberal candidate, Lee Fairclough, as the most likely person to oust Christine Hogarth. This is Yvonne saying this again. I personally donated my $200 provincial check to this, even though I live in a completely different Toronto riding. Hopefully, this helps Doug Ford and members of the government realize spreading falsehoods about bike lanes and targeting vulnerable traffic participants for political gain is a losing strategy. Cheers, Yvonne Mirko S.
Interesting.
Yvonne also sent us some Reddit threads where many users were saying that they were going to donate their checks from Doug Ford to the Liberal campaign in Etobicoke Lakeshore. So it does seem to have been a bit of a movement there.
And Lee Fairclough was the beneficiary of that movement.
Yes.
There we go.
Clearly.
She's the new MPP for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Yeah.
And with that, we're moving on to issue 3. This past week, his first week as Canada's 24th Prime Minister, Mark Carney traveled to Europe, met with the leaders of the UK and French governments, then went to the far north of Canada to announce billions in spending for a new defense system that we would purchase from Australia, not America. And I think we know why.
Yes.
Let's do something a bit different here. It is very unusual to have a new federal cabinet and a new provincial cabinet sworn in the same week. So let's do some comparing and contrasting. For 40 million people, the Liberal Mark Carney swore in a cabinet of 24 ministers, including himself. For 16 million people, the Conservative Doug Ford swore in a cabinet of 37 ministers, including himself. Now, there are obviously no rules about how big or how small your cabinet has to be, but what's going on here? The math is a bit odd.
Yes, so clearly Mark Carney trying to show that there's a bit of a new sheriff in town. Under Justin Trudeau, the Liberals were criticized for spending more money than their Conservative critics would have preferred. So this is a leaner, more focused government, or at least that's the image that Carney is trying to portray. And as I say, try to turn a page on that appearance of the Trudeau government.
Conversely, if we look at Doug Ford, who's now on his third majority government, unlike Carney, because it's a majority, he has a lot more backbenchers to placate. So Ford has also figured out that trying to give MPPs a raise may be a difficult political lift right now. So he has chosen a different route to give his backbenchers a pay boost, and that is just simply make almost everybody either a parliamentary assistant or a cabinet minister, which is why you get a minister responsible for mines and an associate minister for energy-intensive industries. You get a minister of municipal affairs and housing, and you get an associate minister of municipal affairs and housing. In fact, I counted them up, there are 8 associate ministers in Ford's cabinet, everything from auto theft and bail reform to small business to women's and social and economic opportunities, which incidentally is a portfolio that Mark Carney got rid of.
Yes, and just face some criticism for that.
Absolutely, yeah. But this is a tried, tested, and true way of keeping the backbench happy and giving them a sense that if they play the cards right, because cabinet's so big, they may actually get a shot to be in cabinet too. Of course, a 37-member deliberative body is a rather significant sized one, and it would seem to me that it would be a fairly unwieldy decision-making body compared to a 24-member cabinet. But, of course, these numbers reflect the different priorities that the 2 first ministers have.
Your point about a deliberative body of 37 members, I mean, Doug Ford's cabinet is substantially larger than the Toronto City Council that he cut in half.
Interesting,
right?
eh? Isn't that interesting?
24, 25 members of Toronto City Council. Anyway, there is one other point I want to make about Mark Carney's cabinet, because there's an Ontario angle or even a non-poly angle to this, to one of the new names and faces in Carney's cabinet. Ariel Kayabaga, the MP for London West, is one of the new faces we saw last week. Kayabaga first won her seat in 2021, but prior to that, she was a London City Councillor. She won her council seat in 2018 in the first, last, and so far only municipal election in Ontario that used rank ballots to elect city councillors. The Ford government, after they won in 2018, prohibited municipalities from using ranked ballots ever again. Kayabaga, for her part, has repeatedly said that ranked ballots were one of the big reasons why she chose to run in the first place. And so she has credited ranked ballots for giving her political career a start in that sense. So I think it's noteworthy that not only is she in cabinet, she's the government house leader, and the ministerial title that she holds is Minister of Democratic Institutions. And I will be watching with interest to see what direction Mark Carney goes on matters of democratic reform.
But given that cities and towns are creations of the province,
yes,
she does not have the authority to tell the Premier of Ontario, I want ranked ballots in for your next elections.
Correct. I mean, I guess they could do it in the territories, but no, they can't dictate to the provinces what kind of municipal institutions they can implement. But as I think was that last week where I talked about the prospects of electoral reform provincially, like this debate is not ending anytime soon.
Right.
And I believe Mark Carney, sometime in the last year, has said that he is open to electoral reform. He doesn't think that the Prime Minister should dictate it. But as I say, I don't think this discussion is over.
Indeed, it is not. This discussion is over, but it starts a new one. Your column, my column, coming right up. Time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the columns we wrote for the TVO website over the past week. What do you got for us?
Right, so we were just talking about Mark Carney's cabinet. The first official act of Mark Carney's cabinet was to functionally eliminate the consumer-facing carbon tax. As of, I guess, April 1st, it will no longer apply. And so I wrote about what I think are the two big questions that this last sort of decade in Canadian politics and the carbon tax will leave us. One is, I think, pretty straightforward. If the carbon tax is dead, what climate policy will we replace it with? One of those possible answers is we just won't, and we will have less effective climate policy. The Financial Accountability Officer estimates that just in Ontario and just looking at provincial and municipally owned infrastructure, the costs of climate change are going to be somewhere between $4 and $7 billion annually by the end of this century. So that adds up to a lot of money. And that doesn't even count costs to things like private property, right? Like when your basement floods because of a massive rainstorm that you were not planning for. So we have to deal with climate policy, whether we have a carbon tax or not. The second question is a bit more weedsy, and I am going to apologize in advance because this is arcane constitutional stuff, but I think it's important. The structure of the carbon tax. Why was Mark Carney able to zero out the carbon tax at a cabinet meeting? Why didn't he have to pass a bill, right? We normally think of taxation as one of those key functions that, like, no taxation without representation, right? If you're going to increase or decrease a tax, it should be a vote by MPs or MPPs, right?
As opposed to a signature by the First Minister.
Exactly. The way the Liberal government under Justin Trudeau structured the carbon tax is they delegated that power to cabinet. And when it was challenged at the Supreme Court said, this is constitutionally okay. Fun little note, these kinds of delegations are called Henry VIII clauses. You can guess that Henry VIII was really quite happy when Parliament delegated powers to him. The thing is, okay, carbon tax is dead, fine. In that sense, this is not a huge issue, but we are seeing other governments use these kinds of Henry VIII clauses, including just recently, the BC government has introduced a law to respond to tariffs that would give the cabinet really broad powers to create like exemptions and in some cases just ignore provincial legislation. And I'm quite certain that law will get challenged, if for no other reason that some business is going to get treated in a way that they don't think they should be, and they're going to challenge it in court. And it will be really important to see what the courts say about Henry VIII clauses in Canadian law going forward. And so I think those are the two things I will be watching from the death of the carbon tax. And how about you, Steve?
I may be the only person who's still interested in doing postmortems on the Ontario election just happened, but I don't care. I've still got, there's something about that election that still fascinates me, and I want to get this on the record here, and it has to do with strategic voting.
Yeah.
What do I mean about that? Well, okay. For a month straight, during the whole writ period, we heard all of the major opposition parties say how unfit Doug Ford was to govern and to be our premier. But did they cooperate with each other even one little bit to make sure that he would not enjoy a third consecutive majority government? No, they did not. And I explain in my column about how the opposition parties are running, frankly, against each other as much as they're running against Doug Ford. And if they had decided to cooperate just a little bit, they could have defeated him. And I give the example here. There are 6 ridings in the city of Mississauga, 4th biggest city in the province of Ontario. The PCs won only one of those 6 ridings with more than 50% of the vote. What if the NDP had not run candidates in Mississauga where, incidentally, they never win? They take 4, 5, 6% of the vote in every riding. They never win. But what they do is they prevent Liberals from winning seats there, that's for sure. You can make an argument that had the NDP stood down, not run candidates in those 6 ridings, maybe the Liberals would have won 5 of the 6. Maybe they would have won 3 of the 6, but they wouldn't have won 0, which is what they ended up, including, of course, the leader. I'd make the same point about Parry Sound Muskoka. What if the Liberals and New Democrats had not run candidates there? Probably the people who wanted to vote for those candidates would have instead voted for the Green candidate if they wanted to defeat the Progressive Conservative. And instead, that didn't happen. The Green candidate came up just that short, and the Conservatives won the seat. Anyway, you could replicate that idea all over the province of Ontario and have if the opposition parties decided to work together a little bit more, they could defeat the current government, but they choose not to.
Right, but that just sort of begs the question of why are they choosing not to?
Well, I think for a bunch of reasons. Number one, for whatever reason, they all think that they need to run a full slate of candidates to look like they're real serious contenders for government. The fact is, they know, even before the election starts, that more than half the seats they run in, they have no shot of winning whatsoever, unless lightning strikes, which I guess could happen. But for that reason, they run a full slate. There's also another reason, which is they are financially incented to run a full slate. There is a per-vote subsidy that every party gets for every vote that they get. And if they don't run candidates in every riding, they don't get that per-vote subsidy, which is cash in their pockets, even if they have no shot to win the seats. And number 3 here, I think the fact of the matter is that these 3 opposition parties pretty clearly don't like each other more than they dislike the Ford Conservatives. But, the result of their lack of cooperation is that the PCs keep winning majority after majority after majority, which is terrific if you are part of the 43% of Ontarians who voted for the Progressive Conservative Party, but probably not fine for the 57% who did not vote Progressive Conservative. Now, who told me this? I can't remember. Somebody gave me a tip a few days ago about the fact that New Democrat MPP Catherine Fife from Kitchener-Waterloo, she was getting tired of this, and she wanted to have a chat with the president of the Liberal Party, Catherine McGarry, about somehow cooperating. That meeting has not happened yet. I noticed Martin Redcon from the Toronto Star got the same tip, and he did a column about it the other day. I want to be clear here. I'm not advocating this. I am not saying you opposition parties should be doing this. I am saying I am hearing from lots of progressive voters all over Ontario who are tired of always splitting their vote, their anti-Tory vote, among the 3 parties, which enables the Conservatives to win. And since, apropos of your previous comments, since we're not about to get electoral reform in the province because the majority government doesn't want it to happen, if you want change, you've got to figure out a way within the current system that we have to make it happen. The New Democrats and the Liberals apparently have no interest in cooperating. The Greens do, actually. The Greens have been open to a conversation, but not the other 2. So I merely say, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different outcome? I'll just leave that out there in the ether for people to consider.
Yeah, I mean, in some U.S. states, there are rules that allow a candidate to have the endorsement of multiple parties. So like in New York State, it's very common for a candidate to be endorsed by both the Democrats and the Working Families Party, I think is the sort of the more left-wing party. And you could imagine a rule allowing that where instead of the NDP and the Liberals competing in every single riding. In some ridings, they might have a joint candidate, but I assume that would take legislative change, and I cannot imagine that the current government is interested in that kind of legislative change.
Anyway, that's my post-election comments, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll leave it at that from now on. Maybe I'll go find other things to talk about.
So for now, we'll go to the mailbag.
Right on. Let's do that. If you've got a burning question or insightful comment, we always love to hear from you at onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, hit me with your rhythm stick.
This is an email from Felix Chase in Flesherton, who writes, and before I actually get into this, I just want to say this one was really delightful. I really liked this one. Felix writes, I just listened to the episode where JMM was wearing an X-Men 97 shirt, and there is a Canadian political connection that you might not be aware of. Rogue's voice actress, and I have to say in parentheses here, Rogue is one of the characters from X-Men for those who are not enlightened. Rogue's voice actress, Lenore Zan, was elected 3 times as an NDP MLA in Nova Scotia, and she came in second in a bid for party leader. She was then elected as a Liberal MP in 2019, but lost re-election in 2021. Felix Chase from Flesherton,
Did you know that?
I had no idea. This one was
That's a cool piece of trivia.
Yeah, no, I really, really like this one. Certainly I had no idea when I was wearing the shirt, and like, I really wish I had. But yeah, no, as both a fan of the X-Men comics, the X-Men cartoon, and now Canadian politics, that's really delightful.
Everything connects.
Yeah, that Venn diagram.
Everything connects. It really does. Give the email address if you would, sir, and let's get out of here.
Absolutely. If you'd like to ask about content on the show, you can email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
And that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, March 21st, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're always happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Please include your first and last name and where you're from.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Our managing editor is Katie O'Connor. Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
Special thanks to the studio crew for making the set look so darn good and keeping us in focus and sounding good. We'd like to hear that. Shout out to Gil, who's on audio this week. And Gil, thanks a lot for your contribution to our little program here. Until next Friday, everybody. Bye-bye.